All right, so cue dependent forgetting. Um, when the retrieval cues are not adequate, when we have inadequate retrieval cues, it's very unlikely that we're going to accurately retrieve the information that's needed. If the cues are vague, if the cues are sort of tangentially related to the information, or maybe the cue is in a different language than what is usually used by the person who's trying to make the retrieval, these circumstances can lead to difficulties with retrieval. So, back to that list of words that you maybe generated if you were playing along, or I tried to urge you to remember that it was a thing if you didn't play along. Um, so, you were provided with a prompt, and then you were supposed to write down the first, second, or third thing that came to mind. And you wrote those things that came to mind down if you were playing along. Um, Try and write down as many of those words as you can strictly from memory. Don't look at the list. Write them down. So go ahead and take a pause me if you're going to be doing that. I'll wait for you. Okay, I waited for you. Hopefully you're back. Or you didn't play along. Typically, what we find is that just telling you to write down as many words as you can is not a very good cue. People in that context will remember maybe a quarter of the words or maybe a fifth of the words. On the other hand, if I remind you what the prompts were, all of a sudden you're going to remember most of these, right? So if you actually played along, go ahead and pause again and you can go through and try and regenerate the same things. Okay, hopefully you're back. So with a good, robust cue, memory is more likely. So think about that in the context of a class, right? We often like to give little quizzes or exams in classes, and the more robust the cue, the more likely that the learner is to be able to retrieve the relevant information, right? So we want to make sure that, as teachers, we all want to make sure that we're writing exams that have good, robust cues in them. We don't want to write questions that are so clear that you didn't have to attend class, read the book, or know anything about the subject with, you could just guess all the correct, yeah, we don't want it like that. We want to have a certain level of knowledge necessary, but we definitely want to write questions that are clear enough, relevant enough, that a person who knows the information will be able to generate the correct answer. So let's talk about another kind of cue dependent forgetting, the tip of the tongue phenomenon. I've given you an assignment that relates to this that hopefully you'll have fun with as one of your research reports. But the tip of the tongue phenomenon is that sensation we have where we know it. We know, we know it. I just can't think of it. What is it? Maybe we can even describe it. Um, I had this experience one time when I was trying to tell my mom about something that happened to an actress, and I was trying to remember the actress's name. It's a very old reference, so you'll be like possibly going, "Who is that?" when I finally tell you who the actress is. But I was like, remember, she has really dark hair, and sometimes she wears it really super long, and other times really super short. And she was in that movie with that guy. Oh, I can't remember the guy's name either. Can't remember the name of the movie. It was about man, I can't remember the plot very well either. Like the dumbest, complete lack of information that I was providing to my mom. As soon as we gave up, I'm like, okay, never mind. When I think of it, I'll send it to you. I'll give you an old reference. This is such an old story. I'm like, I will email it to you when I remember. Um, and I swear, I think I was off the phone from her maybe 30 seconds when I was like, Demi Moore. I was talking about Demi Moore that whole time. Um, I couldn't think of Ghost. I couldn't think of Patrick Swayze. I couldn't think of anything. I couldn't remember anything, but I knew all of it. I was having so much frustration though because I was having this tip of the tongue phenomenon. It's like right on the tip of my tongue, but I can't generate it. So here's an example from a cartoon. Hey, Aaron, can I borrow some? Shoot, what's the word? You cut things with these. And the kid's like, an X-Acto knife? No, no, no. They look like this and makes a little gesture with the fingers. A peace sign? Man, this is embarrassing. 5-year-olds know this word. Bunny ears that wiggle? Like, no, scissors. Sometimes we get that tip of the tongue phenomenon, and it's kind of, I almost feel like it's more common when it's people's names. For one, is a really common one for me. I have a lot of difficulty generating people's names off the top of my head. And then the other time is like these, like this cartoon, a simple, normal, everyday term for something simple and normal. I can say complicated terms all the time, and I cannot generate scissors. What is that? So that's the tip of the tongue phenomenon. So we have these different kinds of blocking that can occur as one of our, sins of omission. All right, let's get into some sins of commission, where we're going to include something that is not relevant to the memory. So there's 4 types of these. We have bias, we have persistence, we have misattribution, and we have suggestibility. So let's go ahead and talk about bias. All right, so in one study, they showed these objects, line drawings, to the participants, and then they gave them a word to describe each of the objects. So for some people, the word to describe that top one was gun. And then they said, draw the object from memory. So they showed them the picture, they said, this is a gun. And then they said to the participant, draw a gun, right? Some of them, they said, this is a broom. Now draw it. Notice that the things that the people drew are different from each other, right? Given the same exact stimulus, but different labels cause them to remember the stimulus differently. The one in the middle, for some of them, they were told it was eyeglasses. For others, they were told it was dumbbells. Some were told that it was the number 7. Some were told it was the number 4. And so what you get is a adding in of details based on expectation, right? Bias of expectation. I know what a gun looks like, and so I'm going to bend it in a way that wasn't really present in the picture. Or I know that a broom has these characteristics, so I'm going to include those details that aren't part of the original memory, right? See how on the dumbbells they made the single line look more like a connector that would be present in dumbbells, and with eyeglasses they kind of bent it to make it look like it would go over nose. Those kinds of things. So they added details that were consistent with the label and not consistent with the original stimulus. That's an example of bias of having certain expectations clouding your judgment. All right, here's an example. Again, I do this in class and we all have to guess, but here, misremembered movie lines are classic, right? So which is the correct line? Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? Or magic mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? So the correct one is magic mirror on the wall, but most of us say it mirror, mirror on the wall. And it might be because it kind of has a little bit better cadence, to say it mirror, mirror rather than magic mirror. Maybe it's because people sort of expect it to be mirror, like it makes more sense as a sentence to them, maybe, that it would be mirror, mirror on the wall. Maybe people literally misheard it originally. But I think what we're seeing is some kind of imposition of expectations onto the actual line from the movie, and that causes people to hear it incorrectly or repeat it incorrectly. Oh, I didn't mean to enlarge that. Okay. How about this one from Empire Strikes Back? Which is the correct line? No, I am your father. Luke, I am your father. That's not supposed to have a question mark. That's supposed to be a period. It's supposed to say, Luke, I am your father as an assertion, not as a question mark. Luke, I am your father. No, I am your father. Which one is correct? Well, it turns out it's no, I am your father, but I'm sorry, I can clearly remember him saying, Luke, I am your father. I'm going to have to watch the movie again, right? apparently the context is much broader. And one argument for why we remember it incorrectly is because remembering it the way that we do, Luke, I am your father, gives you everything that you need to know in one little line, that this is a Star Wars quote, that it must be Darth Vader talking because he says Luke at the beginning. That there's a lot of context being provided by saying the line wrong. In the movie, you don't need that because you've got the context of the movie. But when you're saying it outside of the context of the movie, having this misremembered line of Luke, I am your father, makes it unique, right? No, I am your father. That could have come from the Maury Povich show, right? Like this, that could come from anywhere. Whereas Luke, I am your father, that is uniquely coming from Star Wars, and so it maybe eases our burden a little bit to have it to misremember it like that. How about this one? I'm going to guess that a lot of you haven't seen a movie from 1932, but this is from a movie called Tarzan of the Apes. And so your two choices are Tarzan, Jane, Tarzan, Jane, or me Tarzan, you Jane. So which one would be the correct um, line from this movie? So uh, in the movie, Tarzan is actually pointing at himself and saying Tarzan, pointing at Jane and saying Jane, points at himself Tarzan, points at Jane and says Jane. So that in the context of the movie again makes a lot of sense, right? Tarzan, Jane, Tarzan, Jane. Like that makes sense. But when you're retelling it to your friends who haven't seen the movie yet, me Tarzan, you Jane conveys a lot more meaning. Right? You could say it, not even have to be together pointing at something, right? So these sins of commission, we're adding in context that makes it more understandable to maybe to people who didn't see this in context, right? That don't know the context of the whole conversation. So these kinds of sins of commission typically, yes, it's a faulty memory. Now, one of the things I would like to argue is, do any of these misremembered lines really matter in the big scheme of things? Are you really like completely misquoting this movie? No, you're not really. This is not misquoting the movie. The intent was exactly what these misremembered lines all say. But what the other part I'd like to argue, so I don't think it's harmful. Like I almost wouldn't even call that a wrong memory. Um, Okay, I'm going to digress for a second and give you an example. In introductory psychology, I use a publisher's website where they have these adaptive quizzes where they immediately give you feedback about the rightness or wrongness of each question. And if you get the question right, then you don't have to see that topic again. And like that, it's adaptive. And unfortunately, they have some fill in the blank questions in this adaptive quizzing situation. And if you don't type your answer in exactly correctly, it gets marked wrong. So, for example, sometimes students will spell Freud, which should be Freud. They will spell it Frued, switching the vowels in the middle. Now, as a human, I can look at that and I know that they mean Freud, obviously, but the computer looks at it and says that's wrong. I've even had students write fraud, Fraud, and I know they mean Freud. And so I know what they mean, right? Context allows me to recognize that they're generating a memory that is intended to be the memory that they're supposed to be having. The computer can't do that, and I've complained to the publisher about that. You need to type in every wrong version of correct answers because I mean honestly, should we be penalizing a student for getting the U and the E backwards? I mean, this is not really the spirit of what I'm trying to teach them. And the publisher's answer is, well, I mean, they should know how to spell Freud correctly. And I'm like, well, I guess that's true. And I guess that's true on these movie lines. I mean, if you're going to quote the movie, quote it right, I guess. But look at what both of these examples are illustrating. Memory doesn't have to be perfect in order for it to convey the information that you're trying to convey, right? It doesn't have, you almost can convey better information if you misquote this Tarzan Jane line, right? Isn't the second one, me Tarzan, you Jane, isn't that a lot more meaningful than Tarzan Jane, Tarzan Jane? Isn't it fine to call Freud Frued? Like, isn't that fine? We know that it's a German word, and so we know that the vowels might be in the different order. It all makes sense to me. You're showing me evidence that you actually know the information. Does this little detail matter? And so when I see these kinds of sins of commission where you're including stuff that wasn't really there, what I see is a person pulling in extra context to help their listener understand what's going on, right? Not necessarily, oh, haha, you couldn't remember the line correctly. Here's one from the 80s, The Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. If you build it, he will come. Well, I know what we say. I don't remember this actually having been the line. I remember saying, if you build it, they will come. That's what I remember the line being. I absolutely remember the line being that. But who's he? Whereas if you build it, they will come. We've used this phrase for a lot of stuff since this movie, right? To mean, well, sometimes if you start the process, it'll attract users, or it'll attract fans, or it'll attract viewers, whatever, right? And so we've used it to mean something maybe different than what the character meant. And he was talking about attracting a particular baseball player's ghost. I'm pretty sure that that's not what any of us mean it when we say it in real life now. And so the context, the details that are included in the misremembered line probably build on the semantic network and the understanding of the listener and everybody else's mindset too. I don't know why some of those got bigger. Anyway, so why do we tend to show this kind of bias in our memories? Excellent question. Let's go ahead and take a break here, and we'll come back and talk about why in a second.